Rajiv, thank you so much for your time. Do you believe that Trump's tariffs are going to take Asia into recession?
I think it's going to be a severe shock to the Asia-Pacific economies because the US is still the world's largest economy and also a very important export market for many Asian countries. However, I think some of the mitigating factors that will help to reduce the overall shock are that many Asian countries have very large domestic consumer markets as well. Japan, China, India, Indonesia are countries which have very substantial domestic consumer markets. And also this nature of export trade has shifted dramatically in terms of markets in the last 20 years. So the rise of Asia has resulted in much greater intra-Asian trade and reduced share of exports to the US and to the EU in the last 25 years. As China has become larger, it's become a much more important trade partner for many Asian countries, but also other Asian countries are more important, such as ASEAN, which is now a very large economy in its own right. So those will help to mitigate the shock. But there's no doubt that for some of the Asian countries like Vietnam and Malaysia, for whom the US is still a very important export market, this will be a severe shock. I think also we need to see what kind of economic response will be forthcoming within the Asia region. For example, there is scope for coordinated monetary policy response or fiscal policy response by the big nations in Asia. So I think the net impact of these very severe tariff measures from the US will also depend very much on what plays out in the coming weeks as Asian leaders come together to try to work out a way forward. And also, of course, they will be negotiating with the US to try to come to some deal whereby these tariffs are reduced. I'm sure the impact of the reduction will be different country by country, but some countries may be able to negotiate some tariff reductions with the US.
Rajiv, regarding those negotiations, do you see any possibility of collective negotiations happening? You mentioned the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Is that possible, that there will be some collective effort, or are the interests across Asia too varied and the countries will therefore have to do their own individual deals with the US?
Well, the grouping of Southeast Asian nations, which is currently being chaired by Malaysia, there's already been a statement by the Prime Minister of Malaysia that he will be meeting with other leaders to try to get a collective response for ASEAN as a grouping of countries to these new US tariff measures. And also there's scope for ASEAN to work together with China, Japan, and South Korea, what's known as ASEAN +3, which has already been a very important common working group amongst the economies of the ASEAN and the Northeast Asian economies. So I do think they will work together. It may not be possible for them to negotiate together with the US. The US may very well say, we'll only negotiate bilaterally, but certainly ASEAN and also together with the China, Japan, and South Korean nations may be able to come up with common policy responses. And some of these strategies could be more initiatives to provide stimulus within the ASEAN region, and also working together with China, Japan, and Korea to create more fiscal stimulus, possibly some monetary stimulus in some countries, but also other initiatives to strengthen trade. For example, one of the very important achievements of Asia has been RCEP, which is a grouping of 15 Asia-Pacific nations as a free trade agreement. They could certainly do more to build regional trade within ASEAN and the other RCEP members. And also there's CPTPP, another Asia-Pacific regional trade agreement where they can strengthen that. And there's been a lot of talk in recent years about the concept of a Asian monetary fund. So that could also be revived to try to create more regional financial architecture to support the Asian region. So there's a lot that Asia can do. And we have to remember now that Asia is much bigger as an economy than it was 25 years ago. Today, the Asia-Pacific region is 37% of world GDP. So they do have muscle to take more action if they really see that the threat from US tariffs is going to create a severe economic shock to the region.
Rajiv, the sort of more longer term implication of this, Donald Trump says that last year the US trade deficit was $1.2 trillion. It's quite possible that future presidents will think, oh, well, Trump did the difficult thing, but now it's working for us. So could this be the end of globalization, the neoliberal philosophy that the market rules everything?
I think what we've seen in the last 50 years has been the success of GATT and the WTO, and also regional free trade and reducing tariff barriers. And it's clearly been an important stimulus for world trade. And that has benefited the US as much as other countries. I think the issues in terms of bilateral trade deficits that the US faces need to be dealt with in a different way, not through these extreme tariff walls, which are hurting US multinationals as much as anyone else. US multinationals are big beneficiaries from the Asian growth. Many of the biggest multinationals in the US have a large share of their earnings coming from Asia, and the growth in earnings is also greatest from Asia because that's where the economies are growing the fastest. So this is damaging for the US. I don't think that this economic philosophy is widely shared amongst US economists either. So I don't believe that this will persist in the medium to longer term as a position of anti-globalization in the US. It may continue for several years now because of what's happening in terms of economic philosophy, but I don't believe that it will be proven to be durable. I think this will clearly be a very big shock to the global economy and negative for the US as well.
Rajiv, thank you so much indeed.